Hi, my name is Ollie Guns. I have been a tiltrotator owner and operator for the last 5 years now, and I'm actually on my second setup. So I get asked a lot of questions about why I run what I run, what the setups are, how much it costs, all of these questions. And I've got access at the moment to a great full fat setup from Rotatilt, which I'm just using on this job here, and I thought it'd be a good opportunity to explain the kind of options you have when you're looking at getting a tiltrotator. So if you're in the market for one, or you're trying to justify it maybe to the company that you work for, this video hopefully will explain a little bit about what your options are and the way to kind of go about it, because there's more than one way to kind of set a tiltrotator up. In fact, there's probably about 3 or 4 different ways you can do it, and the cost varies hugely depending on several factors. So without further ado, let me explain what I mean. So the first thing I would always consider is what sort of work do you currently do or do you anticipate on doing, and how is this tiltrotator going to help you gain more productivity, because that's ultimately what it's about, right? They're lovely things to operate, they make driving a machine an absolute joy, but expensive attachment, and it has to earn money and earn you money or your company money, and therefore earn its investment back. So what sort of work you do will vary really on what sort of setup might be best for you, and ultimately lead down to what it will cost. If you're working with lots of attachments, those attachments require high oil flow, electronic control for whatever reason. Maybe it's got like a switch over underneath it, like cassette grabs and stuff that they use in forestry for felling trees, or all sorts of like fancy attachments like that, and you want to run them underneath the tiltrotator, so that's in place where the bucket would go. Then you're going to need a much more advanced system than if you predominantly just do bucket work, for example. And if you're spending 98% of your time with the bucket and you think, oh, maybe I want to grab, there's an intermittent solution for you. So there's kind of 3 ways you can do these things with control systems. You can go for like a full fat setup, as this machine has, with its, this actually has the older style of Rotatilt controls, but they now have the RC system and new joysticks and all sorts. So but Encon have a DC2 system, which is what I have in my machine. All of the steel wrists have one. They're all give you options to configure the tiltrotator with different rollers on the joysticks, buttons, etc., that it can all be programmed down and work underneath the tiltrotator. Some of them, of course, as well, you can hydraulically run things through the tiltrotator unit itself, and also do the same with electronics. Grease, for example, you can have auto grease down there as well. So that's like the full fat kind of system. Generally, to have more than one option moving at once, so that's not tilt and rotate, I mean underneath the tiltrotator. If you want to be able to run like a grab is just one thing moving, right? But if you were looking to do 2 things moving, I can't think of an attachment that would, but there are out there. Cassette saws are classic because you need the saw option and you grab and all of that. So and if you have any electronics switching, then you would need a full fat system. If you're just thinking you maybe want to grab, then you could run maybe a bit of a hybrid system, maybe go for a 6-pipe solution, as they would be known, and I'll explain that on the end of the machine. You could also run a 4-pipe option, and then just have a button to switch between tilt and grabbing. That saves you a lot of money in the control systems that go in these cabs, because that's where a lot of the cost is on these things. So you don't need any of the clever gadgetry or computers. You can, if you spec your machine correctly, run all that off the standard joysticks, and still get a usable solution. You could even run the gripper like that, for example. So it just depends. It won't be quite as fluid in the way that you can run the gripper and the attachment underneath and rotate and tilt like you can with the full fat system, but it's a really, really good compromise. And for the cost versus the money that it, or the money you're saving really, and the productivity that you gain over a machine with no tiltrotator, then there's a huge advantage with going with that kind of intermittent solution. Or of course you could just, as I say, run it on the standard flow and return with the standard joysticks, Maybe you don't need to run a grab at all. You know, again, that 4-pipe or even 6-pipe solution is a much more cost-effective option to go for. Again, all depends on what you work. So decide what work you do or want to do and what attachments you see yourself running, and then decide what control system you need, which is your next step. So then we come on to machine spec, and that is the actual carrier machine that you're going to fit this to. Now maybe this is a machine you already own, in which case your options are a bit more limited, or maybe it's a machine that you're looking to buy and potentially put a tilt rotator on in the future. It doesn't really matter which way you are, but you can spec your machine correctly to make use of the type of system that you want to go for. So if you're going for a full fat solution with the control system, the full control system, then it doesn't actually matter how many hydraulic lines you have down this arm, because this machine here is a full spec machine as well, very, very nice, but doesn't need these 2 lines down here, and it actually has hitch lines as well. So this is technically would be a 6-pipe machine if I was explaining from what I said earlier. But you don't need that on a full control system. As you can see, only one of them hydraulic lines is actually being used. I think they are actually using the hitch lines on this as well for running the top hitch. But anyway, you could also run that all through the tilt rotator. Depends, you go direct mount. I'll mention about that in a second. But you've got options. You don't need to spend money on the machine if you're thinking of spending more money on the control system. If you're thinking of saving money on the tilt rotator and going down the 4 or the 6-pipe solution, then it's worth speccing your machine up, because obviously you're relying more on the machine to run the tilt rotator, right? This system here, it proportionally splits it all with valves in the tilt rotator to the different functions you want, and you can run the gripper, the stuff underneath, if you had like a whacker plate or any sort of attachment grab or whatever, you know, you can tilt and rotate and do it all at the same time. If you've got enough fingers, it's a lot going on with your hands, but it is possible. So that's lovely, but if you don't need it, you can save a lot of money. So this is the next thing to consider. What sort of spec machine do you want to go for? And that goes as well for the actual machine itself, the dipper length. This machine has a long stick, and to be honest, it's not doing it any favours. You know, we standard spec machines in the UK, and dealers will always try and sell you the kind of UK spec, which is, you know, well, everyone has, you know, 3 buckets and a hydraulic hitch and a, you know, set of rubber tracks and whatever. But when it comes to running these things, you know, this tilt rotator here weighs just north of 300 kilos. You've got 80 odd kilos of top hitch on there. Then you've got the bucket, you've got grippers on here as well. That all adds up. It adds quite a significant amount of weight, and you can have nearly half a ton quite easily sat here just before you even put anything in the bucket. And that makes a massive difference to how the machine handles. So, you know, I would be very careful about what machine I pick if I was buying a new machine as to what I run a tilt rotator on. Generally, they run different tilt rotators for different size of machines. This is the R3 unit. The new one is called the RC3, again with the new control system. But this tilt rotator runs from 6 tons up to 12 tons, I think, or 11 or 12 tons. So you can imagine that's a big range in machines. If you have a 12-ton machine with an R3 on it, it's going to be throwing it around like it's not even there. You put it on a 6-tonner, it's going to know about it, isn't it? So I always try to run, and on my machine, I try and run the smallest tilt rotator unit I can, because it reduces build height, it reduces weight, and it makes the machine drive better, really, on the largest machine I can possibly run it on. Ideally, 8-tonners and the 8-ton range. Capota's machine here is actually kind of an 8-tonner, really, but many 8-tonners, the Cat 308 is actually over 9.5 ton, depending on your spec. Yeah, and machines like that, you know, JCB do a range as well. The Takeuchi TB290, 9-odd ton plus. They're sort of 8-ton machines, but they're not really 8-ton. They will obviously handle a machine. The more weight you have in the carrier machine, the better it's going to handle the attachment. So another thing to kind of consider. But you could still get this machine running this tilt rotator pretty well. I think it would need a shorter stick. It has the extra counterweight, which is something that you definitely need with a reduced tail machine sort of like this. It's not a zero, but it's not really a full conventional. If you're running a zero tail, then you definitely want to be adding weight low down. Steel tracks, even if you have to go for the rubber pad option, it's going to give you weight where you want it, down in the base of that frame. And adding slices to the counterweight is always a bonus. The more stable that machine is, the more you're going to be able to enjoy the process of using this, especially if you're then putting heavy attachments under it. But maybe, again, you just do predominantly bucket work and you do want a zero tail machine. So you could save some weight here by going direct mount. That would save you 80 odd kilos, maybe a little bit more, because you also don't have the secondary pins in the top hitch. It literally is direct mounted to the machine. Great for weight saving. Does mean you can't take it off if you wanted to just run with the bucket, do narrow trenches, maybe things like that, or you had like a crusher bucket or something that you don't really need tilt rotator on for. It's very heavy. So there are advantages and disadvantages to the top hitch. The other thing you do is remove the gripper. You don't need the gripper necessarily. They're lovely things to have. They're fantastic attachments, and you haven't ever had one, so you don't really know how useful they are. But when you have, it's like having another person here. The ability to just pick things up, rolls of terrain, roll it out, pick that out the way, move that all from the machine it's a real luxury. But there are several ways you can do it. So maybe you decide, say you on the machine you've got, maybe you already own it, but you want to save some weight. There are ways to do that, and do check between all of the manufacturers. They're all pretty good at putting weights on there, but because there are so many options, they tend to just put like one weight, and sometimes depending on your spec of it, you can have more than that, and then think, well, why is this so heavy? Because, well, you've spec'd the oil quick change, EC oil, whichever system to it, adds a little bit of weight. You've added a gripper, you haven't added a gripper, it might be detachable gripper, it might not be. As I say, there's many ways to serve up these tilt rotators. So research is key here to all of it. Lots of ways to set them up. The other thing I would always do with a tilt rotator is run the Scandinavian, not just shape, but the S-type as it's known, buckets, because the build height on them is so much better than our traditional pin grabbers. Way better, and the shape of them, the way they have the long toe, they're just a lovely bucket to use. They're generally got hardox in them as well, so they're pretty tough. They are expensive, they're not cheap things, but they enough make a difference to your tilt rotator experience. So think about it. Maybe you've got some existing buckets. I appreciate I did when I started and got my first unit. It's expensive to change, and you think, well, I've got all these attachments as well and I want to use them and utilize them under my tilt rotator. Just don't sell them, because they'll sell well and other people will be happy to maybe get on that next stage. Maybe you've got a tilting bucket currently and you're sort of as a hybrid to kind of get you into the tilt rotator idea. I did, and just sell it, or you definitely don't need a tilting bucket underneath the tilt rotator. I mean, how much do you need to tilt? But you know what I mean. I had all sorts of stuff that was set up for my 35mm pins on my JCB that I own. But yeah, well pleased with the decision to sell them and go down the buckets. They don't need to necessarily be Rototilt or Werencon or steel wrist buckets, although all three of those manufacturers make some lovely buckets. There are other manufacturers out there that do a great job as well. Dig Bits are making a special range now for tilt rotators. You can get Hardox, you don't have to get Hardox. I've got a bucket from Hurricane Attachments, that's a lovely thing as well. Aidan does a lovely job with building them. It's just got the shape right and the geometry, which is important, because I have seen some buckets that are what I would call like a standard pin bucket, but someone's put or even a manufacturer has kind of welded an S-type hitch on or the plate for, and they just don't work. Like a standard grader just doesn't really work with a tilt rotator, and it's very difficult to explain why until you actually use one. But trust me, even if you just get the grading bucket and a cable bucket, they would be the two things that I would say, they make a massive difference. The cable bucket's got very long toe on them, beautiful for digging underneath surfaces and round stuff. You can just get to all these places. maybe your bulk bucket you can live with being a standard one. It's all about cost again, isn't it? And these all add up ultimately. And a tilt rotator with, you know, a couple of good buckets and a couple that you've welded some pins on to make it work, it's good to start with, isn't it? It's a good way to start it. So that would be the way I would go personally, and especially if cost is a thing, which it is a factor for all of us, isn't it? These things are not cheap, and there are some things that you can upgrade later with your tilt rotator. For example, the grippers are often retrofittable to these systems. You know, it's a cost saving, isn't it? If you're looking to just get into it and you'd love a gripper, but it's all adding up, you know, you can add that later. You can't add a control system later. It's very expensive to start changing dippers on machines and hydraulic lines and adding this and taking that away. So, you know, you've got to prioritise where you're at, really. And for me, buckets are sadly one of the compromise areas, but I really would, if you can afford it, definitely at least get the grader. You'll probably find you do most of the work with the grader because they are fantastic buckets, and you can just do so much with them, especially with the ability to tilt and rotate. So yeah, that's my thoughts on setting up tilt rotators. There's many options here, and I certainly haven't gone through every single thing. Research is key. Finding somebody with the machine that you have is another key thing. You know, plenty of people out there now on Instagram with tilt rotators. There wasn't when I did mine, especially at the mini end of the market. And I wish that I'd have been able to speak to me before buying one, because it would have settled a few things in my mind. Weight particularly, I was always worried about. Something I did on weight actually was I calculated how much I thought the tilt rotator would weigh from the website weights, as I said earlier, and then I weighed. I actually took my hitch off and I took my standard bucket off and I weighed it, which is pretty crazy, right, as an idea with the bathroom scales, to be careful not to break them. But then I knew how much my standard hitch and my standard bucket weighed, and then I just added bags of cement, because they're 25 kilos, to kind of replicate what the tilt rotator would be in the bucket of the machine, and then threw it about and just got a feel for what that weight was like on the end. Seems ridiculous, but something I would recommend, because how else do you get a feel for it on your machine? But nowadays, with other people owning these bits of kit, you know, there's plenty of these around now. It's easier to talk to someone that pretty much has. They will have your machine, and they'll probably even have your preferred brand of tilt rotator on it. And if not, you know, they all handle pretty much the same, really. There's small advantages and disadvantages to each. But it's really all down to price and service backup, as always. So yeah, reach out to people, because people like me and others are always keen to talk about tilt rotators. You know, we've all been through that journey. And we all have opinions. We all just work in different areas as well, and sometimes people might have wished that they did something else, and that could be invaluable information to you looking to potentially purchase. So anyway, that's my thoughts on setups for tilt rotators. There's probably even more that I could go through, but I've got to get back to work. Lunch nearly over, so I'll catch you next video. Thank you very much.